skipping ahead. I think I'll say this later, and I probably do. The ball's in your court, and I'll get to that later, right? The idea is, no, it really is all ego, and if it's not, demonstrate how it's not. And I'll talk epistemologically about the complications that arise at that level later. So otherwise, there is no need to assist. Nietzsche says, quote, "Pity is to be discovered as the root of all, absolutely all, moral impulse hitherto." Right? So the impulse to act morally, right? The impulse to act morally, the thing that's going to motivate my act in the world. So we're talking a meta level here, right? We are talking meta. The impulse to act morally. It's not the action itself. It's the impulse to act morally, sort of moral deliberation, if you will, to be technical. Moral deliberation is itself, as he says, pity is discovered as the root of all moral impulse, right? My act of moral deliberation under this account is itself motivated by this notion of pity. So pity becomes the foundation, right? I feel pitiful for those people, for them, for their plight, for their suffering, right? If I'm in a position where others feel pity for me, I feel pitiful for Dr. Campbell because he always talks about he doesn't have friends in his videos. Oh, let me try and send him a friend message and we could be virtual buddies. Well, I don't need your pity. I'm straight. I'll be alright. But you get the idea, is that all of this action is morality, as such, is motivated out of this sort of very sappy sense of the nature of the individual circumstance or the condition, environmental or mental condition of the other person is such that it elicits a sense of pity in me for them. Right? Top of page 65. He says the following. I love this line, right? This is note 368. Pity is a squandering of feeling. Pity is a squandering. It's wasting away of feeling, right? Plus, you take the idea of if one does good merely out of pity, if the act is motivated, so it would be this, really. And then we would change this to if one does the action merely out of pity, pity informs my moral consideration, and my moral consideration then causes me to act, rather than the belief. Nietzsche would say all of this is false, right? You know this is false, because really what is here is egoism. But assuming that you don't think it's egoism that's motivating your act, and you think it's something else, well, Nietzsche says even if you don't agree that it's egoism that's informing your act, let's say you disagree with his argument, well then what's motivating your act is pity. And what a pathetic way to motivate an action for someone else. He's going to flip it in a second, right? Nietzsche says, one second. Nietzsche says, if one does good merely out of pity, if you do good merely out of pity, it is oneself one really does good too, and not the other, right? So the idea is a combination of both of these images here. And what we get is this, right? We get self, we get other, and this is obviously the egoist. And here's one. And here's two. Right? My consideration for the other is motivated by pity. My consideration for the other's plight is motivated by pity. Right? So if you wanted to say, no, Nietzsche, listen, it's not egoism. It's not egoism that's driving me. I'm not motivated by this sort of egoistic motivation, this egoistic mentality. They are suffering. They need help. He says, okay, well, fine. If you refuse to say that, then your motivation is out of pity for others. Nietzsche thinks, that pity is squandering feeling, right? You're wasting your feelings, but, nevertheless, that's what you think is motivating your action, fine. Even if it's the case that you argue it's pity that's motivating my act for the other. This is the action in the world. This is the other, the plight of the other. The plight of the other solicits, if you will, my pity. It's there sort of projecting itself, throwing itself toward the faculties of sensibility, moral faculties of sensibility of the moral agent, and it sort of triggers, if you will, feelings of pity. Nietzsche would say you're wasting your feeling, but anyway, it's sort of like my discussion on apathy and care, right? You're wasting your care caring about celebrities. They don't care about you, right? So you're wasting your, similarly, if you've watched that video, which is crazy because I doubt anybody's watched all of these things, so these references might be too technical for really any of you to understand, and I apologize about that bit. Some things is just complicated, I guess. But the idea is you're squandering your feeling for the concern of the other. Insofar as you're squandering your feeling, don't delude yourself, Nietzsche says. Your actions are still self-interest, right? Your actions of pity still refer back to an egoistic motivation. It's just that it took one more step to get to egoism. Egoism wasn't sort of a given. Egoism was still at the root of the action. However, when you reduce this back, and you can put antecedent after antecedent after antecedent after antecedent after antecedent, it doesn't matter. Once you get to the sort of Aristotelian uncaused cause, to avoid an infinite regress of conditions, at the beginning of this chain of causal events, and we're not talking about, biologically causal or sort of physically causal, we're talking about intellectually, conceptually causal. When you get to the beginning of this causal chain, that foundation is egoistic. So, sure, pity. You want to use another concept? Throw your concept in, and I'll show you how it isn't altruistic, because it couldn't be altruistic. It is motivated by a concern for yourself. It's a pretty genius argument, right? So, this image is a reflection that the plight of the other triggers in my sort of faculty of sensibility, my moral faculties, a feeling of pity, which I've wasted on the plight of the other, right? And insofar as I delude myself to believe that this feeling has created in me a moral deliberation. Should I help them? Oh, I feel so bad for them. And then I start to contemplate, how much should I cut the check for, blah, blah, blah. I cut the check, I help them feel better. They get the check. But what do I get in return? I get the card from little Paulo. I get the card from whoever. And it says, oh, thank you so much. I wouldn't be able to survive without your generosity. And makes me feel good. Look, everybody look, I got a card from them. I know now that my money was well spent. I'm a good person. I can sleep better at night. It's all egoism, right? Nietzsche says. It's almost impossible to argue otherwise. I'll talk about the epistemological complications in a bit. So, first bullet point after the first image on top of page 65. Pity for the other is the appearance which motivates moral action, right? Pity for the other is the appearance, right? So that the relationship between the plight of the other and my faculty of sensibility, right? In an almost it doesn't have to be Kantian because Nietzsche wouldn't use Kant, but I mean Kant sort of cornered the market on these sensibilities, right? It is an appearance. This feeling that I have is contingent on to be sort of really biological about it, and Nietzsche will get biological in a second. It's to be very, very technical. It's sense data that's flooding this body, which is nothing more than a huge, receptor, right? So the world's transmitting data. I'm receiving all of this data and processing all this information. I see the young child. I see the child starving. It triggers connections immediately to my children, and I might even transpose my child's face on the face of the young boy or girl. If there's enough sort of empathy within me, I can sort of understand the child's plight. Wow, I wouldn't want my child to be like that. Oh, isn't that a bad case for them? Maybe I can help. All of this is going on in fractions of a second, nanoseconds. It's processing in my brain immediately, and I immediately know whether or not I'm going to cut the check. That deliberation, that image